Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for April 8th, 2022. I'm Benji Fisher moderating, and also present are Ralph Kohler, who's sharing his screen, and we'll start off the discussion. Andre Pedrosa, Antonia, Kimberly Amaral, Offer Schall, and Thomas Howell. So Ralph, you want to talk about questions asked at listening sessions or things that we can talk about at meetups and such, right?
Yep, indeed. My idea or suggestion was twofold. On one hand, to start off the survey, let's call it that way, by asking maybe 3 brief questions to a broad range of people, a diverse range of people in, for example, as you already mentioned, meetups, for example, or Aaron offered to ask at his faculty at the university, the content team, or a few developers, and so forth, just to get a broad range of people and ask brief questions. And the interviewees should only either verbally ask them or in written form, and it should only take 3 to 5 minutes tops. And my rough idea is so far, what are your most important tasks to do your job in Drupal, and what are the most important informations about the site and task in your responsibility to feel in control? That would be a suggestion from my end. The wording and the content is definitely not finished. It's a rough draft. And is or are there any tasks and information you would wish to have to improve your experience further? So it's basically to ask for tasks and to get a list of top tasks from a broad range of people to get an idea what's the long tail and the short neck. And problem is, those questions are basically on the surface. There's a danger of generalization, the habit, and for example, you don't get that deep. And in the second step, the idea is to introduce something like listening sessions. Those are roughly 40 minutes to 1 hour one-on-one meeting with a broad range of people. That's usually 7 to 10 are enough, and you could do that continuously over a bigger time with different scopes. The idea is, I don't know how many of you have read the links I've posted a while ago, but the rough idea is to get an idea what the problem space of the people are using in that context Drupal, find out their inner thinking, their emotional reactions, and what is driving their behavior and the type of usage, and how they interact and why they interact in a way with Drupal. And a listening session would be basically just the introduction of the listener, to then provide some sort of safe space and that there are no right or wrong answers, and then set the context. And the idea is something like, what we are really curious about, what are your guiding principles and the personal needs in your daily interaction and usage of Drupal in its admin interface? So what I would like you to do is think about a usual day where you had to solve your usual task, what tasks you need to solve and which information you need to be aware to be productive and in control, just talking through the experience and your inner reasoning. Have you, for example, set everything up on your own, or have you fixed processes? Just place yourself there and think out loud what you do and why you do it and what you feel.
Okay, so let me interrupt for a minute. And let's just go back to the first one.
Yep.
And let's try to get a little more in writing. Let's try to get some more people involved in the discussion. So we have these two stages. One, these are questions that you might ask at a meetup or some other meeting. It's supposed to be quick. Do we want to give a little bit of context, like why we're asking these questions?
Benji, there's also something that's really important to me when gathering information is you really need to have some information about context for the individual that's responding to you, even for informal questions. Because I've run into problems in the past where we've gone off to a great extent to respond to the 1% of 1% responses, because we're not getting a good bead on the collective audience. And the second thing is when we ask questions like, what is the most important task in your job in Drupal? Like a lot of the people who use Drupal don't think they are using Drupal. And so it like the role in comparison to the types of informal and formal questions that you ask is really critical. Otherwise, you're self-selecting for the same type of responses. And that's just been my experience. I am not an expert in this, but it's been a problem in past sites. It frequently is like you ask a room full of people and one or two people are the ones who raise their hands. And so you get the same responses. And so I missed, is this at DrupalCon that we're asking these questions? Or is this just in general, we're writing this list for any time?
So I think the idea is to have questions that we could ask in a variety of situations. Yeah. So I suggested doing it at a Drupal meetup. And as Ralph mentioned, Aaron also suggested he might do something like this at his university. So, so Thomas and I both brought up the question of context. And then there's the wording of the questions, and Thomas points out we have to keep our audience in mind. And if you're asking it at a Drupal meetup, then people understand they're working at a Drupal site. If you ask it in a different context, you probably, as Thomas says, they might not think of what they're doing as a Drupal site. So you'd probably have to phrase the question differently. But let's take one at a time. Let's come up with a sentence or two that provides context. Why are we asking these questions? We could be sort of specific in saying that we're thinking of redesigning a dashboard for Drupal, or we could, it's probably better to be a little more general and saying we're just trying to figure out how to help people find what they need on a Drupal site.
What was the second part you said? Please.
His suggestion is like how to say that we can say specifically that we want to ask these questions to get a better navigation, or just there's some general questions like we're trying to improve the way you find information. Am I right?
Yeah, but let's give Ralph something that he can actually write out. We're trying to figure out how to find the pages you need to work on a Drupal site. And depending on the context, we might call it something other than a Drupal site. So that's just one sentence of context. I think that's probably enough to start. And obviously this is just a first draft. We can improve it later. Anyone else want to suggest some changes to that, or shall we move on to the wording of the questions?
I think there's another important thing in context, which is why the person should care, or the motivation. I always say the goal of asking these questions or this inquiry is to improve your experience in working with websites based on Drupal, or websites and or applications based on Drupal.
That's good. Could you repeat again, please? The
Yeah.
goal?
The goal of these questions is to improve your experience and interacting with website, with your experience in, not and. In interacting with websites or applications based on Drupal.
I like that. But in regards of the first part, we are trying to figure out how to find pages that might give potentially a wrong impression that it's more about finding stuff.
Should we use display? How to display the pages you need?
Or
I'm really thinking in terms of navigation. How do you find your way around the admin interface of a Drupal site?
So maybe we should state that. We should say we're trying to figure out, or we're trying to understand. Figure out is a little more slang. We're trying to understand, or better understand, how you use and navigate on a Drupal site to build content and configure it, and or configure it. Is that what you were saying, Benji, or am I off?
Yeah, that's a different way of saying what
I like what you said. I'm just trying to make it more universal.
I actually think the what's currently the fourth line, your suggestion is one of the better ways. It's sort of generic. And I think it says enough. I think that's enough context. I also think that depending on whether it's a Drupal meetup or a shop that uses a Drupal site, depending on the context, one or the other of these might be more appropriate. We don't need to have one universal introduction.
That makes sense.
I'd sort of like to move on to the next stage and work on the actual questions. Unless people have more they want to say on the context bit. So the first question you listed, Ralph, really seems sort of like two questions to me. In fact, there's the word "and" after the word Drupal. That's you could just break the line there, remove the word "and," and you would have two questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's twofold. First, you have the task. Second, you have the information. Yeah.
And of course, the goal is to have short questions that people can answer briefly.
This is a crazy question, but I like to know what someone's opinion is, and I would give them, like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel about Drupal? Just to give me context in terms of all the other questions I'm going to ask, because sometimes people have a very, and you can say, how do you feel in general about Drupal, or something like, I don't know what you can put a modifier in there that may be more audience specific, but it's trying to get their temperature before I get into the rest of the questions. Also, how long have you been using Drupal? And then how much have you been using Drupal? Do you use it 1 times a week, 1 times a day, 1 times a month, etc.?
Is the first question, how do you feel about? Do you want to know how much the person likes Drupal?
Yeah, it's basically just
because the sensation I have hearing this question is that I can answer not just about how I like or not, but it's not a polarity question. Like, there are more directions about feeling about. Like, I can feel, I don't know, maybe someone is always stressed about Drupal, or not just like I like or I don't like, but I feel, I don't know if we could rephrase this question to target more.
I like both of them. In general, it really depends on the context for me. You're just, and anyway, I would write both versions of it down. There are contexts where I'm just trying to get when I've got someone there, I just want to quickly be able to look for commonalities with people who give me an 8 through a 10. Like, are there common patterns in responses for people who indicate a strong preference versus those who don't have a strong preference? But your information, are you frustrated by Drupal when you use it? Do you find it makes it easier to get the work done that you want versus other websites? I like that information for a more robust background, but I didn't want to, like, I was trying to come up with the fastest way to just organize responses for analysis.
Yeah, I was just saying that when I heard this question, I feel like it's more a opinion question where you would answer like with words, not just 1 to 10. Usually in my company, when people would like to know how much you recommend something, they use the question from 0 to 10. How much you recommend this, or how much would you recommend my? For example, if I want to do a survey about myself, one of the most important questions is from 0 to 10, how much you would recommend in me working, recommend my work. So probably something like this.
Yes.
Like, how much would you recommend another person to use Drupal?
That's a great way to write it. And that would be a better rewrite.
So I think that we're losing track of the goal of these questions. If this is an exercise we want to complete in 3 to 5 minutes during a meetup or something, then we have to keep the questions short. We can't spend too much time on these initial questions you have at the top, because they're going to stop us from getting to the later questions. And I think the goal of these questions that Ralph is presenting is just to generate ideas. And there will be later stages. There will be the listening sessions where these might be more appropriate.
I get that, but what you just said, we didn't say that in why we are asking these questions. Then that's a very important distinction. We were asking these questions not specifically to find out how to improve the experience. We're trying to ask these questions to generate ideas for how to improve the experience. And that would have been earlier, but for me, that's a big distinction, Benji.
So that would be probably something you'd want to mention in the context at the start.
Yeah, and we can get back to that later. I agree with you. I'm bike shedding, but I didn't understand that was the intent of this. So cool.
Yeah. So maybe those three things that you put at the top, how do you feel about Drupal in general, and the next two, maybe those could be moved to the listening session section, where that's going to be something longer.
Sure, totally. We can bring it down to that and just move on to what we want for informal questions.
Okay.
And Ralph, am I right here that this is the two different stages that we're talking about? That the first part is just supposed to be coming up with some ideas that will then be used
to generate ideas, to basically to get a broader list of tasks and points people rely on and have a focus on, to get an idea where their focus is, and that you don't build something providing functionality that nobody needs or uses. And that way you get a rough idea where the demand is and where the needs are and where the problems are. A first idea, and to get a more in-depth idea, then that's the point of the listening sessions.
So we want to keep the questions open-ended, but on the other hand, we do have the idea that we're going to be using this to inform the dashboard and the admin menu. And I've long thought that there must be some better way to find your way around the admin UI of a Drupal site. There must be some better way than hierarchical menus, which is what we've got. And unfortunately, I don't have ideas on what would be better, but I guess a dashboard is one way. So those are the things that we have in mind, but we don't want to restrict people too much. So we're not going to tell them all of that. We're going to tell them that we want to improve their experience in working with the Drupal site. And we've got 3 questions we're going to ask. That's about as many as we want. We might add one, we might replace one, and in the long run, we'll probably be rewording them. Andre asks in the chat, should we ask which frustrations they have with Drupal? Maybe in the listening sessions. I'm not sure that's what we want in the quick questions. Ralph, what do you think?
I agree. I guess if someone has frustrations, then those will sooner or later come up in the listening sessions. And in regards of those informal questions, if you directly ask about frustrations, but the third question I have is, or are there any tasks or information you would wish to have that indirectly already implies nagging points, meaning I need that specific task, but I don't have it in Drupal, or that information would be nice, but I don't have it. That is annoying and frustrating, but a bit put in a neutral way, meaning with frustrations, it's a bit loaded.
Ralph,
But
in regards to this, one daunting thing that I've experienced is if the question is too general, it can be hard to know where to start. Would you have any recommendations of key elements of the experience that we could specifically ask that type of question about, to give them a context or some place to start with what they're considering?
my initial thought was to keep it intentionally unspecific so that people not get framed upfront in a certain direction. And if you ask a broad variety of persons and usage profiles, then my idea was just with those questions, with those open-ended ones, is, and if you don't give the people time to think for hours, but say, hey, right in the next 5 minutes, your top tasks you're using at the moment, or you're required and you need every day in your job, then you get those tasks and get an idea what's actually used in the interface. That was my idea behind it, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think at this point, I'd like to move on to the listening sessions. I think we've got a good start for the part one. Ralph, could you remind us what sort of the idea of a listening session, how it's, you know, this is different from user testing. This is different from structured interviews, right? What makes it a listening session?
Listening session is basically you set a context. For example, I have in the Fluid Hive article I've linked, there are transcripts of 3 listening sessions, and basically in the beginning of such a listening session, the listener sets the context. Once, for example, thank you so much for taking the time today. We'll take as long as it needs to. What I'm super interested in is what went through your mind the last time that you decided to go out to a restaurant during this particular historic period. It's basically about dining experience outdoors in a restaurant. And the idea is,
Ralph, we can't see what you're looking at.
Sorry. Where is it? This one, sorry. You see now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, sorry. And the idea basically is the listener doesn't have any interviewing questions except setting the context, and then the person who is listened to just talks. So it isn't a concept to apply with anyone. If you have someone who just answers with yes and no answers, then you don't get anywhere. You need someone who uses images when talking, gloomy and expressive, then you get somewhere. And someone at best who is self-reflective. And an important part is you don't go to parts and or you don't bring up topics the interviewee or the person listened to has brought up on his or her own. That's an important part about it. And 1 second. That's basically that image boils it down. It's one-on-one, audio only, no list of questions, no notes, no analysis. It's a record formal session. It's important to have a safe space, and you have to help to get the speaker to depth. What went through your mind, micro reflections, pin to place and time, find the roots, silence. So on the surface, in regular interviews, you have explanations, preferences, opinions, statement of fact, scene setting, generalization, passive behavior, and so forth. But the idea is to get deeper and to get to the motivation underneath, the guiding principles, emotional reactions, the inner thinking. So you get, at the end, if you have Indy Young, who coined that concept, said you have basically, you need 10 to 12 listening sessions, and then already flesh out 4 to 5 thinking styles. And that's the key to get an idea about the users and what's the purpose about using something. That's the rough primer again.
Okay, so could you go back to the text document?
Yeah.
Where you were, yeah. And write down a little bit about when and where we might do listening sessions, who would be involved. So I guess when and where, they're one-on-one sessions. So it's anytime you can schedule it with someone.
Yeah.
And where would you find volunteers?
My idea was, one possibility would be when we apply the informal questions, you already get an idea how those are getting answered. If they aren't anonymous and you have some contacts provided, then you could maybe pick there someone already. Or if, for example, it's Aaron gives out those informal questions and he already knows, hey, maybe one person in his department might be a suitable pick, for example. So it's pretty open. The only requirement, in my humble opinion, is to have someone able to talk and willing to talk. And who doesn't need questions all the time to keep the listening session going.
So if I go to my meetup, I throw out these initial questions, get some answers, I'll write those down. Maybe some of the people who answer will be interested in going into more depth. I can give them my contact information. We can try to arrange a session where we could talk about it in depth. Is that right?
Yep.
And another question is how are we going to manage this? I think one way would be, take these notes you're writing and put them into the description of a new issue on Drupal.org. Maybe the ideas queue, I don't know. And then as we go to meetups and such and use these questions, I can leave a comment saying I went to such and such a meetup and I asked these questions and I got these answers. And maybe as I go through that, I'll make some edits to the issue description or the issue summary where we talk about what questions we ask in this section. Is there some better place to put it than an issue on Drupal.org?
I guess for the start, it would be okay on Drupal.org in an issue, but I guess in the longer run, because I think those answers aren't only limited to dashboard and useful in the context of the dashboard, but is in the longer run also for other parts of the Drupal UX. And especially the listening sessions, they are more or less useful for everything, because you get the driving force and the thinking patterns behind people using Drupal. And that's something I've pasted. If you have, that's also from Indy Young, you have user research, check, think, make, the idea, the brainstorming, and then the people part to get an idea and developing empathy about the people using the solutions you provide. And so you get some sort of feedback mechanism. And that could be something that could be established over a longer time, that you run that from time to time, every few months or so, 1 or 2 listening sessions, for example, with at a later point changing contexts, maybe. But in my humble opinion, it might be beneficial and something to give a try.
Okay, so this is something we've been talking about for several weeks now. I'd just like to get some notes in a sort of permanent place. So an issue on Drupal.org would be one place to start. And then let's have people go out to their meetups and ask these questions and see if there are people who are interested in talking in more depth. And let's sort of get started on the process. And in order to do that, we need a little bit of management, so, you know, some place to organize our thinking. So let's do that on an issue on Drupal.org.
Yeah.
Not in Slack, not in these Zoom recordings.
So should we open an issue in the ideas queue?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
And you can use what you have written there as the start. You can clean it up a little bit, and we can continue to make improvements to it going forward. Okay.
Yep.
Does anyone else want to say anything before we move on? Okay. I see that Christina Chunias has joined us a little after we started that discussion. Christina, is there any progress in setting up a BOF? I think we were talking about either dashboard or admin menu or both.
I just I submitted the one for the BOF. What I did there is at least the one that I submitted, it goes more focused into the create a plan instead of what questions we were going to, or what content was going to be in there, because we need a plan to end up merging something into core. And ideally we should probably create an initiative or something like that, and discuss technically how we are going to do that. And that's the goal for the BOF, instead of actually asking the questions or actually coming up with the content that needs to be in there, because I assume that will be something that will happen on a parallel effort. So yeah, there's the BOF for the dashboard. I haven't submitted the one for the user admin menu or content editor admin menu, because I think that's still a lot in the air, especially if we are going to redesign the toolbar. I'm not sure if you've been aware a little bit about the conversations that had happened around this. Basically, well, the redesign, trying to fix something up for the toolbar, they changed the designs, and anyway, there was a little bit back and forth, and one of the conclusions of that is that we need to redesign the toolbar itself. We're going to, on a first round, just try to fix the problems, the accessibility problems and design problems that we have in there right now. But the idea is to try to redesign that, and depending on the changes that we end up implementing on this toolbar, it could kind of override or whatever we decide for the editor menu. So I think it could be smarter to put that on a hold for a while, and let's see what happens with the toolbar. And basically, because I think we'll have enough work with the dashboard instead of focusing on two things, let's just focus on one and get that done. And yeah, that's the status for the dashboard. Don't have anything else.
Okay, I can finally confirm that I actually will be going to DrupalCon in about 3 weeks. Yay. Is there a BOF schedule on the website, or?
Not that I found.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, if it's in there.
So do you have a time slot and a room for your BOF, or is?
I have nothing. I have the confirmation in my email from the form that I sent, the Google form that I sent, and that's all that I have.
Okay, so that's the way BOFs work. You propose something and then it will get scheduled for you.
Yeah, exactly. So as soon as I know something, I'm gonna paste that on the UX channel on Slack, and I will try to start promoting that and try to find people that will join. So, but no, I don't know anything else for right now. So.
Okay. Well, I will keep an eye out for that. Is anyone else here planning to attend DrupalCon? Or is this just Christina and me?
I can't this year, unfortunately.
I also don't.
Okay.
Yeah, this year it's going to be probably complicated for a lot of people.
Okay. Antonia mentioned she'll be attending the one in Prague, DrupalCon Europe. I've never been to a European DrupalCon, maybe one of these days. Okay, we have a little more than 10 minutes left. There were, again, a couple of suggestions on the issue for today's meeting. Is there anything anyone would like to bring up, either from there or for something else? I can share my screen. Oops, that's last week's. Here we go. So we talked about Ralph's issue. And Derek asked for a review of this issue about improving status messages. I'm not sure that one really needs a group discussion. It needs someone to pay attention to it. And just in Slack earlier today, someone asked this question about CK Editor 5. And I haven't had a chance to look at these too closely. I don't know if anyone else has.
I have.
Which one?
Both, basically.
Okay.
But the CK editor one I've been following and also reported related issue before already.
Okay, so why don't we have a look at that, see how far we can get in 10 minutes.
As the basic problem about the issue there is that out of the box CK editor, if you create a new node, for example, and have a CK editor 5 field there, then that field is 1 row high, and then it expands indefinitely. Meaning, if you type 1 return, 2 return, 3 return, and have 50, and then select all and copy and paste, then you get at the end a 10,000 row high editor field. And from an editor experience, that's a bit horrible. Let's put it that way. If you have several CK editor 5 fields and those grow also indefinitely, then that's a problem.
Okay, and for the sake of the recording, I should say this is issue 3273755.
And the problem is that's an upstream problem. Because it's a problem to know the extent of that field, and the CK editor 5 developers proposed a workaround with CSS, and that's what this issue is about. You can set, for example, max height, min height, or height. And Wim Leers was a bit reluctant at first and wanted to implement it upstream. But at the dev days now, a new issue got created, this one you have open right now. And the idea was to set the max height at least. And that is what is being discussed there.
Okay, so what would be useful to discuss here? I mean, it clearly is a usability problem. And what opinions can we give that would help move this along? I guess we could look at this proposed resolution. 3 possible solutions. The first is do not allow the field to grow, fix it to the configured value. 2, allow the field to grow, but arbitrarily limit that growth to a yet to define number. Or 3, allow the field to grow and add a limit configurable in the UI along with the current minimum number of the row field configuration. So should we discuss the merits of those 3 different proposals? Would that help? I mean, it seems to me that normally when configuring a text area, when configuring the form mode, you can put in minimum and maximum number of rows, or maybe you just put in one number. Maybe you say how many rows the text area will have. So I would expect to have that same sort of control here.
For me, I also think that the fixed height sounds more like the default. Instead of a minimum and a maximum, just a fixed size, and if it grows larger, then it will have an internal scroll bar.
So didn't that option get transfer to CK editor 5 config. The one we already have that Benji mentioned about the number of rows.
But the setting hasn't had any effect. The setting, the interface, the UI interface for it was there, but it had no effect. It was a problem.
Oh, okay. So I guess this is a bug then?
Well, it sounds like there's a disagreement between the Drupal developers and CK editor developers. The CK editor developers seem to think it's a feature, right?
Yep.
And maybe it's a different point of view. Maybe they're thinking, okay, the one field that CK editor controls is all we have to worry about, and it's an advantage that it can grow as needed. And Drupal comes along and says, well, we're going to have that CK editor field, but we're also going to have all these other fields on the same page. Maybe that's the source of the disagreement.
But the behavior of the field in CK editor 4 is a fixed type, right? If I remember correctly.
I think so. I think there's a contrib module. In fact, I know this because I recently used it on a site I'm working on. There's a contrib module that installs a CK editor plugin that gives you a little drag bar at the bottom right corner of the window. That works with CK editor 4. That's currently in use on one of the Drupal sites I work on. And that lets you change it both horizontally and vertically. So that actually seems to me like a pretty good solution. I wonder if there's a similar plugin for CK editor 5.
I think someone suggested that. That's a good idea, and I think I also read a little bit of this issue, and I don't remember anyone suggesting this.
Okay, so maybe I can leave a brief comment suggesting that that this works well in CK editor 4. Can we do the same thing? Maybe even bring it into core with CK editor 5. But that'll depend on whether the CK editor plugin is available for version 5. Just have a couple of minutes left. I wasn't sure we would have time to get deeply into this, and I guess we can't. Any last comments before we close out the meeting? Okay. Thank you all for coming, and do it again next week.
Thanks, Benji. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Nice weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Likewise.